Welcome back to another Micmac Tabletop review. Today we'll be taking a look at the Hi-Point CF380 semi-automatic .380 pistol. This is the Hi-Point CF380 semi-automatic .380 pistol. With its two-tone slide and heavy construction, the CF380 has a distinctive appearance. Now, to be honest, I've never been all that interested in Hi-Point firearms. With heavy, chunky designs and slides cast from zinc alloy, as opposed to machine-forged steel, Hi-Point pistols have always brought up images of cheaply made Saturday night special junk guns for me. Right down there with the Bricos, RGs, Sterling, and Jennings. I try to remain open-minded, but it's a bias I admit I have trouble overcoming. That being said, reviews of Hi-Point have usually been surprisingly positive, well, at least surprising to me. Not only that, I found out that the Hi-Point company has excellent customer service and provides a lifetime warranty whether or not you're the original owner of the firearm. There aren't many companies today that offer that. In my book, that alone qualifies the Hi-Point CF380 for a fair review. So when I saw this Hi-Point CF380 pistol for sale last year for only $50, I thought I ought to at least check it out. For $50, I expected to be what many refer to as a gunsmith special, or at the very least, a worn-out firearm. But as you can see here, it actually seems to be in pretty nice condition. So let's check it out. But before we go any further, let's make sure this gun is cleared first. And by the way, if you enjoy these reviews, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Now, usually I cover price further in on my reviews, but the issue of price is such a major aspect of Hi-Point firearms and largely why I have this CF380 today, so let's get right to it. I always try to do a value search on used guns before I buy. Hi-Point firearms have a reputation for being the lowest priced US-made firearms available. As far as I can tell, that reputation is well deserved. The CF380 has a manufacturer's suggested retail price of only $196, with actual new sales being much lower, like about $150. And that's pretty common. Last year I actually saw a new one sell for $90. It had just the one magazine and only a cardboard box, but $90 for a new gun? Really? Of course, there's inexpensive and then there's cheap. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, but I can tell you now that while the Hi-Points may be very affordably priced guns, they're not what I typically call cheap guns, and certainly not junk guns. By the way, for comparison, I recently reviewed a Taurus G2C 9mm, which usually sells new for about $200 and often for less. And I actually gave a pretty good rating to that G2C in that review, which you can see at episode 202506. Actually, it's a nicer gun for the money than you'd expect. And I admit it surprised me. So in comparison, even at a typical price of $150 for a new one, the Hi-Point CF380 would really have to surprise me and certainly perform better than it looks. So how about used value? Well, Genetron.com suggests a used value of $140. But TrueGunValue.com suggests a used CF380 is only worth about $66 today. You heard that right, $66. Compare that to the used value of what could be arguably one of the worst junk gun pistols ever made, the RG26, at $160 today according to True Gun Value. Heck, in perspective, even a Jimenez 22 at $110 has a higher used value. Even more interesting is that recent national sales records indicate that there are used Hi-Point CF380s that have been sold for less than $30. Seriously, $30. In which case you could conclude that a used CF380 has hardly any value at all. In retrospect, having paid $50, I'm beginning to think I may have overpaid for mine, but in the real world, you're probably going to see lower sale prices at auctions due to the additional cost of shipping, credit card or money order fees, and FFL transfer fees, which could total as much as an additional $80. At a local gun store or pawn shop, on the other hand, depending on condition, expect a price tag closer to that Genetron.com used price of $140 today, which you might be able to negotiate down a few bucks. Still, you get the idea. The Hi-Point CF380 can be had for very little money. So is it any wonder that I would be a bit dubious about owning a Hi-Point CF380? I mean, cheap is cheap, right? Well, if price always followed value for what you get, that would be one thing. But if there's one thing I've learned buying used guns, and I've bought a bunch, that's not always the case. Supply and demand may be a bigger factor. So the real question here is the Hi-Point CF380 just a cheap junk pistol, or is it one heck of a bargain? My answer might surprise you. But first, let's take a look at the Hi-Point company. Hi-Point is headquarters in Mansfield, Ohio. Hi-Point Firearms was founded in 1990 by Thomas Deeb, who they say focused on producing no-nonsense guns for no-nonsense shooters. Deeb's aim was to produce low-cost, safe, durable, and reliable guns. A working man's gun, if you will. So how well has Hi-Point met that goal? Well, as a matter of fact, Hi-Point firearms are some of the least expensive firearms you'll find. As we just discussed, the CF380 is indeed very inexpensive. No argument there. But as I found out, Hi-Point firearms are also very popular, which says something about the Hi-Point firearms themselves. Okay, if you're an experienced, avid shooter, used to carrying a gun like a SIG, a Glock, Walter, or Smith & Wesson, Hi-Point probably is never going to come into mind at all, ever. On the other hand, for those who are price is a major issue, Hi-Point appears to have its fans. As far as I can tell, in 1992, the CF380 followed the Hi-Point C9, a popular 9mm pistol that was launched in 1990. Hi-Point has made a bunch of pistols in 9mm, 380, 40 Smith & Wesson, 45 ACP, and even 10mm. Hi-Point also makes a popular line of carbines as well. Hi-Point remains in business today with its manufacturing operations still located in Ohio. Well, what about safety? In addition to being somewhat overbuilt, the Hi-Point CF380 includes an on-off thumb safety in addition to the magazine disconnect safety and free trigger lock. In fact, the Hi-Point CF380 is often noted as one of the safest, inexpensive handguns you'll ever find. Now what about durability and reliability? How about this? Hi-Points are known for their simple design and robust construction. All Hi-Point firearms are designed with few moving parts for higher reliability and increased durability. They are low recoil semi-automatics and use a simple blowback method of operation. As a result, Hi-Points have a reputation for being among the most reliable on the market. Now, can I back that up? Yep, Hi-Points actually have one of the lowest return repair rates in the industry, and yet they offer one of the best warranties in the market. And oh yes, Hi-Point pistols are rated for plus P ammunition. You've got to admit, that's pretty impressive. So Hi-Point firearms are American-made, offer a good selection of calibers, have proven to be reliable, and are backed up with good support and an excellent warranty. As for packaging, this was a used gun, so I don't have the original packaging, but as I understand, a new Hi-Point CF380 would have come in a simple cardboard box along with one magazine and the expected paperwork and a lock. But it's also common to see Hi-Points in a plastic case, extra extended magazine, laser, and even with a compensator. All are Hi-Point options that are still available today. Now this is where I usually mention any U.S. movies featuring a gun I'm reviewing, and yes, I actually found one for the Hi-Point CF380. The movie is Last Shift, a 2014 American psychological horror film directed, edited, and co-written by Anthony DiBlasi. Juliana Harkavy stars as a rookie police officer who is tasked with taking the last shift at a police station before it's permanently closed, as strange events lead her to believe that it may be haunted. A Hi-Point CF380 is carried as a duty pistol by Sergeant Cohen, played by Hank Stone in this film. Obviously, this would have been highly unlikely in the real world, but that's Hollywood. As for specifications, the Hi-Point CF380 is a double-action only blowback compact single-stack semi-automatic design pistol. As I mentioned earlier, this gun is rated for plus P ammunition. The slide is cast from zinc alloy, and the frame and grips are black polymer. Barrel length is 3.5 inches, overall length is 6.75 inches, height is 6.25 inches, width is 1 3/8 at the grips. The sights are 3-dot fully adjustable or ghost ring fully adjustable rear sight like on this one. There's an on-off thumb safety, last round hold open function, includes one 8+1 round magazine. There's a magazine disconnect safety. Overall weight is 30.85 ounces empty. It's 100% American parts and assembly. Hi-Point also has a lifetime unconditional warranty. Now before you hit the range, let's talk a little bit about function. One of the very first things you notice about the Hi-Point CF380 when you pick it up is that it's really, really heavy. At almost 34 ounces fully loaded with 9 rounds, this has got to be the heaviest 380 ever. In fact, empty, a CF380 weighs almost as much as an empty 10mm Glock 20, about 31 ounces. Think about that for a minute. Some of that weight is in the enormous chunky slide, which makes the CF380 somewhat top-heavy. But the molded full grips feel actually pretty good. Nice and solid with a fairly light texture. It may only be a 380, but the CF380 feels quite substantial. The controls are the safety slide stop release and the mag release on the left-hand side. The location of the safety is fine and very easy to operate, but the mag release is just a little too far forward for my thumb, and I have long fingers. It also protrudes quite a bit. The magazine is easy to load, no need for an autoloader. The mag seats nice and tight into the well. With the pinky return on the standard magazine, I can easily get a full solid grip. Feels good. Racking the slide isn't light, but it's not too heavy either. Slide serrations are a bit narrow, but deep and a little high on the slide. If you have weak hands, this may not be the gun for you. There's a grittiness to racking the slide. By the way, there's a bit of rattle to this gun, which appears to come from the slide, which has some play in its seat on the frame. I've heard that Hi-Point standard 3-dot pistol sights allow for a good sight picture. The gun comes with an alternative rear sight. As you can see, we have the fully adjustable ghost ring sight installed on this gun. It's the way it came to me. It's sort of like a peep sight that you'd see on a rifle or maybe a target gun. Personally, I think it's a little weird on a pistol like this, but it functions well enough. A replacement traditional rear sight can be had from Hi-Point for only $6. The trigger is plastic, but wide enough for comfort. Trigger take-up. It's about 1/16 of an inch. The pull is very short, maybe 1/4 inch at the most. The trigger pull weight on this gun averages about 9 pounds. Reset is very short, but basically requires a full return of the trigger, and there's only a barely detectable click. Alright, so let's get this gun out to the range and try it out. I usually start at 25 feet for pistol range training, so that's where we'll begin. This profile target is actually not full size. The head is only 3.5 inches wide, so it represents a smaller target than a real person at this distance. But that's okay for our purposes today. Let's see how I do. Racking the slide is very easy, but also very gritty. Mild felt recoil. This ghost ring peep rear sight is a little strange for me, but it works well. The gun holds open after the last round is fired. Can't complain about accuracy, pretty good. Yes, this gun is fairly heavy for a 380. It's about the same weight as my full-size Beretta 92 FS, so it really feels like a big gun. And as you can see, it's chunky, but the full feel is comforting. Staying at 25 feet, let's try some headshots. Again, not bad for about a 4-inch target at 25 feet. Although the Hi-Point CF380 is a bulky thing, it actually feels good to shoot. The trigger is okay. Trigger pull is a little too heavy for me, but the pull is short and seems to roll off nicely. Let's push the target out to 35 feet and see how I do. Let's try alternating between the left and right 3-inch side targets. Okay, this rear sight slowed me up a bit, but I can't complain about the gun's accuracy. Pretty nice. Well, this gun seems to function as it should. It just seems to need a little better grip stippling. It feels plastic to me, and then the slide is just so thick, and these sights are so odd, but the gun shoots just fine. Okay, let's wrap it up with a little rapid fire. Again, staying at 35 feet. I'm aiming for center mass. Not bad. I'll admit the Hi-Point CF380 performed far better than I expected for a $50 380 pistol. Me too, for that matter. I'm impressed. I seem to have underestimated Hi-Point. Well, I've already talked a lot about good and bad of Hi-Point firearms and the CF380 specifically, so let's just summarize here. As cons, the Hi-Point CF380, its slide racking stiffness builds toward the end. It looks odd, even in its rear sight, although it works, is just plain odd. It's downright ugly, basically. Heavy and thick for what it is. No rail for accessories. Requires a punch and removal of a pin for disassembly. Only 8+1 rounds, yet thicker and heavier than most double stacks. By the way, you may see extended 10-round magazines offered for the CF380, but you should know that there's been frequent problems reported, such as bullet tilt issues. So I suggest you might want to just stick with the Hi-Point 8+1 round mags. Its zinc alloy slide and polymer frame means this gun doesn't have enough steel for magnetized storage or attachment. Magnets basically just don't work with it. As for pros, I found the CF380 to be accurate. It has a low felt recoil. It's comfortable to shoot. The external thumb safety is well positioned and the safety works smoothly. It's certainly very inexpensive, but it's not a junk gun in my opinion. Internet stress tests on the CF380 have shown that you can expect it to be rugged. It's available in a good number of variations, and there are a good number of accessories. It has an excellent warranty. It has great customer service. It seems to function as it should. To disassemble, remove the magazine. This slide lock has 2 notch areas in the slide. The rear one is for setting the safety. The forward one here is for locking the slide back and for takedown. Lock the slide back. There's an 1/8 inch roll pin back here. Use a punch or finish nail and a hammer to knock the pin through and out of the frame. With the pin removed, you can release the slide slowly, holding your fingers over the muzzle in the rear of the slide to catch the recoil spring and firing pin stuff, etc. if needed. With the slide all the way back, lift the slide up and forward off the frame. Remove the recoil spring and the plastic guide from the frame, and that's it for the frame. Now remove the retention pin, the 2 springs, and the firing pin from the slide. If you got an older CF380, you'll have 1 or 2 plastic collars on the firing pin spring, and that's it. Reassembly is just the opposite. Return the recoil spring with its guide to the frame. Return the firing pin, springs, and following lock pin to the slide. Place the slide over the frame with the recoil spring end against the lower matching area on the slide and carefully compress the recoil spring so the slide will sit back onto the frame. The lock pin needs to set into the hole in the back of the frame. Once together, rack the slide back and lock back in place. Return the 1/8 inch pin to the frame and drive it in until flush. Return a magazine and test for function, and that's it. Now before we end today's video, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't already, be sure to like, share, and subscribe down below. And thanks for watching. In summary, the Hi-Point CF380 was a bit of a surprise. I can see the intent of its origin in the affordable yet reliable pistol for the masses. Produced since the early 90s, the CF380 has developed a reputation for its accuracy and durability in spite of its heavy use of alloy metals and plastics. It's not a pretty gun. It's probably one of the most bulky, clunky, and heavy 380s you could choose, but it's functional and seems to get the job done. And in spite of this gun's gritty trigger pull, the CF380 is comfortable to shoot and smooth to operate. So wrapping up, if you take a moment to really check out a Hi-Point CF380, you can see this is truly a pistol for the masses, what Hi-Point calls a working-class, low-cost, reliable pistol. And it would seem that that market is growing, which is why Hi-Point has been and is likely to continue to be successful. Yes, the CF380 is a budget gun and certainly wasn't built for its looks, but you seldom hear any complaints about reliability, quality, or performance, and that's an important point to consider. So, back to my original question, is the Hi-Point CF380 just a cheap junk pistol, or is it one heck of a bargain? Well, obviously, I can't say it's junk, but whether it's a bargain depends on your situation, I suppose, and how you intend to use it. And I think that's the real issue for me. No doubt the CF380 is heavy and bulky for daily carry for what it is. And personally, I require a tactical light and laser on my home defense guns, and there's no rail on this gun, so probably not a good choice there. I expect it might make a good truck gun. I certainly wouldn't worry about it getting beat up, although as I said earlier, there's not enough steel for direct magnet attachment, which would be my preference. So there's that. I don't know. Compared to a Taurus G2C 9mm, for example, at only a few bucks more, the possibilities for the Hi-Point CF380, because of its construction and design, just seem more limited. On the other hand, perhaps like me, you'll find it's more than you expect for what you paid. True, I can't imagine I'd ever carry a CF380. It's more of a novelty for me, but I must say that it's got me curious about other Hi-Point products. And in the end, as I always say, any weapon you carry is better than the one you left at home. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll be back for my next tabletop review. Until next time, stay safe.